Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Dial It Up. I'm back. It's actually been a while since I've been able to get an episode out for you guys, but hopefully we're going to get these out more regularly. And in the time between my last episode, 3 new resources came out. So we are going to be doing episodes on that. Now, to start us off, I'm going to be doing Pandora's Box, which was one of the case incentives that came out with Justice League Trinity War. To get this resource as well as the Rock of Eternity, you had to order a case and then buy the resource. You may have got it some other ways, but that was the intended way of getting these resources. So, to start it off, with Pandora's Box, first thing is force construction. Pandora's Box costs 12 points. At least 1 and up to 7 distinct sins may be attached to this resource and cost 4 points each. Pretty standard what there. The lowest that this is going to be is 16 points, and the highest it goes up to is 40. Now, the only thing to really note on that is the fact that it has to be distinct sins. So when you look at the actual Pandora's Box, there are 7 deadly sins that go on here, so you're not going to have 7 greeds, 7 envies. You're going to have 1 of each sin attached, or up to all 7. Get back on there. Okay. Setup. The beginning of the game. Choose red, Path of the Hunter, blue, Path of the Ravager, or green, Path of the Manipulator. Turn the dial to the starting line of the chosen color and only use click numbers of that color for this game. So if you're at a tournament, this is actually per game, so you can decide at the beginning of the game which one of the dials you're going to be going on, and as you click it on, you see the click number in the bottom right hand side. The color will correspond to what path you're doing, red, blue, and green. I don't know about you guys, but my Pandora's Box looks black when it's supposed to be blue. It goes in order though. When you start it off, red, then blue, then green, and each of those have 7 clicks, which is going to correspond to how many sinners. We'll get into that in a moment. So as you look, as it clicks, you'll see that each slot has 2 powers. And then they'll actually be, the section of powers will be different depending on which path you decide to go down. The next section is sinners. When a friendly character has a sin on its card, it is called a sinner and is assigned Pandora's Box. Once per turn, you may give a character a power action and assign it a sinner from this resource by placing it onto the character's card. When you do, turn this dial to the click number equal to the number of these sins on all sinners' cards. A sinner may not have more than 1 sin on its card from this resource unless there are 3 or more friendly sinners on the map. So, break that down a little bit. As much like the lantern, the power batteries, we have an extra game state where these characters are called sinners, much like we had core members. So when you have a character assigned a sin through this resource, they are called sinners. And then, of course, the game text, everything on the card will, from there, refer to sinners, and that way they are referring to any character that has a sin assigned from this resource will be considered a sinner. If you have a sin come in from one of the actual chases, these guys bring in their own relics into the game. If that sin relic is brought in from a chase, it is not coming from the actual Pandora's Box. It will not count towards this resource. You are not considered a sinner if you had one of the chases bring in the relic for you. Much like the construct trait for the power batteries, you're only a sinner if you've been assigned directly from the resource. And then once per turn, you may give a sinner a power action and assign it a sin. Much like any other resource that hands out relics, the power battery, the Mandarin rings, the Book of Skulls, once you hand out that relic, it's assigned to that character, they can use those powers. Now this has been a little bit tricky just because in the past, these resource cards have actually said, assign it this relic, it can use those powers. Or when you equip this hammer, use it as a relic, fragment, use it as a relic, and that character can use his powers. They cut down the wording on this one and just said assign it that sin, and implied from there that yes, once you are assigned a sin, you are going to use the powers of that sin. And also this is a once per turn power action, so you're only going to be able to assign one sin per turn. And then once you do that, you're going to be clicking the dial based on how many sins are currently on characters. So once you put out a sin, put it to click number 2. When you have 2 sins out, when you have a sin out, put it to click number 1. When you have 2 sins out, put it to click number 2, etc. Now the one thing to note is that if you have a sinner who has been KO'd and their sin is removed from the map, you're not going to turn the dial at that point, but if you're going to assign a sin after that, the dial is still going to match how many sins are currently assigned to characters that are active on the board. So if you had 3 sinners out and one of them KOs, and then next turn you assign another sin, your click number is still going to stay on number 3 because you only have 3 sins out. So it is possible that as your sinners get killed off, you're not going to see click 7 or click 6, however that ends up. If your guys start getting killed off, you might not get to the end of your sin path dial. And then once you get 3 sinners out on the board, and that is 3 separate friendly characters that have a sin attached to them from the resource, then you can start doubling up on this, much like you would on the hammers. However, unlike the hammers on the Book of the Skulls, those characters do have to be active on the board and be separate sinners. So once again, we go back to if one of your sinners gets killed off and your sin goes away, then you're still considered to be knocked down. So if you had 3 guys out, but one of them gets KO'd, you still only have 2 sinners on the board. And you have to have that 3rd sinner on the board to be able to start doubling up. So if your guys are getting killed off fast, it's going to be a hard time to start doubling up because you do actually have to have those guys active on the board in order to start double assigning sinners. Next we get to, now that I talked about all that KOing, we get to scoring. Scoring. If a sinner is KO'd, any sins on its card are removed from the game and scored at 4 points each. If there are no sinners on your force and no sins attached to this resource, Pandora's box is removed from the game and scored at 12 points. So this is a resource that may possibly go away before the game is actually over, because you don't have to put all 7 on there. You could put 1, 2, 3, 4. But as soon as Pandora's box is empty and all of your sinners on the board are gone, the resource is gone and scored. And then each time a character assigned a sin is killed off, they're KO'd, their relic gets scored for the end of the game, and that is actually removed from the game. It doesn't go back to the resource like we've seen in the past. Next we have I'm not going to say this right, the Vagaries? Vagaries? The Vagaries of Sin. Jason's shaking his head at me. The Vagaries of Sin. Once during your turn, you may roll a d6 that can't be re-rolled. If you do, sinners can use the power in the corresponding slot until your next turn. Now, I did mention earlier that each slot is going to show 2 different powers. So what you're going to do at the beginning of your turn, roll a d6, and on a 1 or 3, you're going to use the top power. On a 4 to 6, you're going to use the bottom power. So every turn, it's going to change what powers are available. And now it says that your sinners are going to use it. So everybody that has already been assigned a sin through this resource will have access to that power. Next part we get to is emptying the box. During your turn, if all 7 sins were assigned this game, all sinners have at least 1 action token, and there are at least 3 sinners on the map, you may turn the dial to click number 9 and do not click it again this turn. This is kind of a hard spot to get to. I won't get too into it because I'm just kind of explaining this, how it works to you guys, and telling you how to get there is Jason's job. But basically, so you have to have emptied the box. And it says if all 7 sins were assigned. So you had to have the box at full to even get to this point. So all 7 sins had to have been on the resource to begin with. So it had to have been a 40-point resource to get there. All of those had to have been taken out. at least 3 friendly sinners. So you could have been doubling up at some points. Once you get those 3, you can start doubling those up. So as long as there's 3 separate friendly sinners on the board with sins attached to them, 7 are gone, all of those have to have action tokens. So if you have the base 3, they all have action tokens. Maybe you have 5, 6, 7 sinners out there. They all have to have action tokens to be able to do this. Now, once that happens, you don't have to take an action or anything to do that. You're like, oh, I meet all the conditions. Let's start turning this. Now, at the end of the 3rd path here, we have one solitary click that has 3 number 9s in the corner. So that's click number 9 for all 3 different paths. And it has a white bubble 1 and a white bubble 2. Those are the special powers that are on the back of the card here. Now, number 1 is the 3rd eye, Possessed. Sinners modify their combat values by +1. Sinners can use improved movement, ignore elevated, ignore hindering, breakthrough blocking, improved targeting, ignore elevated, ignore hindering, breakthrough blocking, and modify their speed and range values by +2. Now, the one thing to note on this is that the modifiers are happening at the same time. So your +1 to all of your combat values, and then additionally, you're going to be +2 to your speed and range. So at the end, your speed and range are going to be +3, where all the rest of your combat values are +1. And also note that this is going to come into effect with the rule of 3 because they are your combat values being modified, that once your speed and range are modified at the +3, you're not going to get anything beyond that because of the golden rule of 3. And then number 2 is the Gateway to Earth 3. Sinners modify their combat values by +1. Sinners can use the Mystic's team ability. Once per game, choose another DC team ability, and sinners can use that team ability when they can use this power. So that one is going to have your combat values. All your combat values are +1. You can use Mystics. And then once per game, so once you hit this point, you get to pick an additional team ability. It can be any DC team ability. The one thing to note is that Mystics and PD are considered both DC and Marvel. And then anything else that is considered DC, you can choose even uncopyable abilities like the Outsiders or Quintessence can be used through this Pandora's box. Now, the one thing to note is that when you get to this point, when you get to click 9, you still have to roll to see which one of the 2 powers you're going to get. You don't get both powers. It still works like earlier on in the dial. Beginning of your turn, roll a d6. 1 to 3, you get power 1. 4 to 6, you get power 2. And that is actually how to play Pandora's Box. It's one of the easier resources that we've seen come out recently. Pretty straightforward once you get around the nuances of sinners and how that is actually kind of a game effect, much like core members. Now, if there's anything any further questions you have, anything you think I didn't go over, feel free to comment down below, and we'll see you next time for another episode of Dial It Up.
Married with Clix is brought to you by Majestic's Heroclix sales down in Costa Mesa, California. Right now, they're in the middle of a storefront change. In the meantime, don't forget to check out their eBay store. If you check the link down below, they always have great Heroclix stuff at fantastic prices, and they'll ship just about anywhere.